Well, hi there, everyone, and welcome. Today's recipe is for a mix in a jar. This one is for a perfected pie crust mix. It is wonderful. I have fiddled with so many versions of this mix that I feel like I finally perfected it. This pie crust mix is not fussy, it's not delicate. It's easy to work with, it's easy to roll out. You don't need to rest the dough or refrigerate it, so you can go straight from mixing it up to rolling it out and then using it in your favorite recipes. It bakes up beautifully. It's tender, it's flaky, it has great layers, and it's delicious for both savory pies like a chicken pot pie or anything sweet like apple or peach. The unexpected ingredient of that scrambled egg mix gives it stability, while the butter powder gives it flavor. I'll show you a couple of ways to use it today, and I've got a bonus recipe for you, peach hand pies. Yum! So let me show you how to put this mix together, and then we'll make some pies. Alright, first thing, you'll need to get out a large bowl before you get out your jar, because we're going to mix the ingredients just in the bowl, and then we'll put them in the jar. So start with 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and to that add a heaping tablespoon of our scrambled egg mix, a heaping tablespoon of our butter powder, and a heaping teaspoon of kosher salt. Give that a good mix and kind of combine the ingredients before you add the lard to it. So this recipe is based on how my grandmother made her pie crust, and she always had just the perfect flaky, tender pie crust. So I'm going to use the lard here because it will give you a very flaky pie crust. But it's very important that you use good, fresh lard. Don't use something that's been sitting on your pantry shelf for 2 years. And just combine that with a pastry blender. You're looking for a really thoroughly combined, very fine crumb. Then you can get out your quart jar. I think a 24-ounce jar would be enough to hold this amount of mix. You can put an oxygen absorber in there if it makes you feel better, but honestly, I don't think you need it because you can't let this sit on your pantry shelf for longer than 3 or 4 months because we put the lard in it already. You don't want it to sit there and go rancid. So go ahead and put use by date on there. Make sure you use it up by that date. And when you're ready to make a pie crust, all you have to do is get out a medium-sized bowl, empty out your mix into the bowl, and add ice water. Now the ice water is important, but other than the ice water, the recipe is really not fussy at all. You'll want to start with probably 4 or 5 tablespoons of water. It kind of depends on the weather and the humidity. I ended up using 5.5 tablespoons of water. When you're mixing it with a spoon, you can get it to a certain point, and once it starts to kind of clump together, then it's time to get your hands in there. Now, guys, I'm sorry, this is the only way that you can really do this pie crust properly is getting your hands in there. So if you're the kind of person that doesn't like to get your hands dirty or messy, this is probably not the recipe for you. You have to get your hands in there and feel it. You need to be able to squeeze the dough together and have it stay together. You want to squeeze it and have it like form into kind of a ball. That is almost there, but I ended up adding a little bit more water, like another half tablespoon of water to it. You want it hydrated enough to where when you start to roll out your dough, you don't see a bunch of cracks in the middle. If you see cracks in the middle, then put it back in the bowl and add a little bit more water. Now, cracks around the edges are fine, but you don't want cracks in the middle. And it's good to flour your surface and flour your rolling pin and just kind of rotate it every once in a while, just so you know that your pie crust dough is not sticking to your surface. but it's really easy, y'all. It's sturdy enough to where you can rotate it without worrying about tearing it. And the way I get that sturdiness in this dough is by adding the Thrive Life scrambled egg mix to it. The egg gives it just a little bit of extra sturdiness, but not so much that it makes it tough. It's just perfect. And adding that butter powder in there gives it really nice buttery flavor. Now I wanted to show you how to make some hand pies, okay? And I needed a 6-inch cookie cutter. Well, I didn't have one, so I'm just using the lid to my sugar canister. I washed it and I thought, hey, this will work just fine. You can use this dough for anything at this point. You could just slap the whole thing on the top of a chicken pot pie or put it down in a pie dish for a quiche. You could do whatever you want with it. But I wanted to show you how to make a couple of different hand pies. I'm going to do a sweet version and a savory version. And see, I'm re-rolling these scraps several times. It doesn't matter. They stay tender. It's really wonderful. It's very easy to work with this dough. Okay, now we're at the point where we have to figure out what we're going to stuff our little pie crust rounds with. Let me show you this bonus recipe. This is for some peach pie filling, so we can make some peach hand pies. It's very simple. I'm starting with 2 cups of our Thrive Life peaches that I crushed up in a baggie, a little bit of our lemon powder, just 2 tablespoons of sugar, some salt, and a bit of cornstarch. And to that, I'm just adding a cup of water, stirring it up, and I'll bring that to a boil, reduce it to a simmer, and then it's gonna cook for about 15 minutes and make a wonderful pie filling. I will put the full recipe down in the show notes below. Of course, you could do any flavor here. I'm showing you the peach, but I think apple or blueberry would be fantastic here. I've got recipes on my channel for an apple crumble, and that apple part of the recipe would be great in here. I also have a recipe for blueberry pie bars, and that blueberry would be fantastic in here as well. Just super delicious options for you guys. Now here's an optional glaze that you can put in that same jar in a separate baggie. It's just some powdered sugar and some of our lemon powder again. And to that, just a little bit of water, and it makes a fantastic glaze for the tops of these hand pies. And you want it kind of a thin glaze, not too thick. All right, now for the savory pies, I decided I would just use some leftovers I had in the fridge. For St. Patty's Day, I made my Irish stew. I'll link the recipe below. But what I did was I got a slotted spoon and I just drained out most of the gravy. You don't want a really thin filling for these pies. You want it kind of thick. If it's too thin, it'll just ooze out the sides. And it's much easier to work with cold fillings. So even if you just made that peach pie filling, put it in the fridge for as long as possible and it'll be easier to work with. And all you need is 2 or 3 tablespoons of filling for the middle of these little pies. So I'll slow this down and show you what I did. I kind of painted the perimeter with that ice water that I had sitting out, and it just helps the pastry to kind of adhere to itself. And then you just kind of seal the edges, and using the tines of a fork, you crimp the pattern on the side, and that helps not only to seal it, but it's really pretty too. Now, in order to make sure your pies don't really explode in the oven, you want to go ahead and vent them. So I just got a little knife and put some little vents in each one of them. What's really nice to do is to add an egg wash, and it helps with browning. It makes for beautiful pie crust and pastry. And all that is some of our scrambled egg powder mixed with some water. It makes a great egg wash. I use that all the time. 400 degrees, 15 or so minutes. And little Teddy came in to visit. All right, so after about 15 minutes, this is what you have. Those beautiful little hand pies. And I always like to cool them on a wire rack. It keeps the bottom crust from getting soggy. So isn't that nice? And see how nice it is to have those vents? Gives a little breathing room. And some of the stuff's going to bubble out, but that's fine. I mean, this is a homemade pie. I noticed there was a little hole in my pastry dough. So I tried to kind of squeeze it together, but y'all, it did not work. I had a blowout there in the oven, but I think it might have worked a little better had I used some of the scraps to kind of make a patch for it. But anyway, it's okay. These are homemade pies. They're rustic. Okay, when something like that happens, you just say, it's rustic. Yeah, here, I'll slow down and show you how I did it. I just filled each little circle of pie dough with about 2 or 3 tablespoons of the peach pie filling. And then using my fingers, I put the water around the perimeter, around the edges in order to seal the pie. And then I kind of squeezed out the air and got the fork for crimping the edges. Then I made some little vent holes and painted each one of them. Same kind of process I did with the savory pies, but I'm going to show you an alternative to the glaze. So if you don't want to do the glaze, you could do something my grandmother used to do, and that is add a little bit of a cinnamon sugar topping. My grandmother on my dad's side, she made the best fried pies. Now, she called them fried pies, but they were actually baked. She never fried them. She always baked them in the oven. My favorite of her fried pies were her apricot pies, and she always sprinkled the tops of her apricot pies with cinnamon sugar. This is very nostalgic for me, and it's actually my preferred way of eating this pie. I like it better than the glaze. So here they are when they come out of the oven. Somewhere between 15 and 18 minutes. I think I cooked mine 18. See where that pastry gave out there? Yeah. But that's okay. I ate that. It was delicious. All right, let me show you how I did the glaze. You can do it however you want to do it. I just wanted to show you, you can do kind of a drizzle method where you get a spoon and kind of drizzle the glaze over the top. And by the way, I did cool these first. The glaze will stay on better if the pies are cooled. Or you could do the paintbrush method, which is my preferred method. I think it gives a good complete coating of glaze on the pie. And it really does kind of remind me of those Mrs. Baird's pies that are in the little packages. We would grab those every once in a while and put them in our school lunches growing up. It kind of reminds me of that with the glaze all over. But it's a delicious, light glaze. It will harden as it cools. All right, there it is. Now you can see the glaze has hardened and it gets nice and shiny. Aren't those pretty? But don't they look like the little Mrs. Baird's in the packages? Except these are going to be so much better than that. Not only will they taste better, but also you know exactly what you put in there. I just loved these. I think my husband said this was his favorite one as well. They're so good. And then don't forget about the savory pies. You could put, you know, if you had leftover beef pot pie, or if you had some leftover chicken pot pie soup. I've got a recipe up on my channel for chicken pot pie soup, and that would be wonderful in here leftover. My daughter loves it when we put leftover taco meat in these and then bake them up. We call those empanadas. If it's the Tex-Mex, it's an empanada. I'm pretty sure every culture has their own version of a meat pie. I've got a recipe that I might make at some point for a Natchitoches meat pie. It's a Cajun meat pie from Natchitoches, Louisiana. It's delicious. Do y'all make meat pies? My favorite use for this pie dough is actually just for chicken pot pie. I love chicken pot pie. My family does too. And what I usually do is I roll out the dough pretty thin, and then I just set it on top of a casserole dish that has the chicken pot pie filling in it, and then bake it up till golden, and it is so yummy. For this recipe here, for these hand pies, my pie crust dough was a little bit too thick. So I think the ratio of filling to dough was a little bit off, but the sweet pies were thinner and they were better. So you might have to make this a couple of times and figure out what thickness you like your pie crust, but I like mine on the thin side. So there's so many things you can do with this pie crust mix. Okay, here are some options that I thought about. You could make a quiche with it, right? Of course, you can do any kind of pie that needs a crust, like an apple pie or a cherry pie or a peach pie. But you could also do lots of different savory things like tomato and onion and cheese tart, chicken pot pies and beef pot pies and turkey pot pies. You could also make kind of homemade Pop-Tarts. The crust is delicious. It's just as good with a savory filling as it is with a sweet. It's flaky. It's tender. I think you're going to really like this one. I love having a just add water pie crust mix on my pantry shelf. For years and years, I have used the Betty Crocker boxed pie crust mix that you only have to add the ice water to. And my family loves it. We have loved it for years. I can't even find it anymore on the store shelf. So I have finally developed a recipe that my kids love just as much. My daughter Ashley actually said, "Mom, you nailed it." And she gobbled up the pie crust sticks that we had. So I am so proud to bring you this recipe. Okay guys, I will include my full recipe as well as my shopping link in the description box below, just in case you want to pick up any of the ingredients that you see featured in my videos. All right guys, thank y'all so much for watching. This was such a fun video to make. I hope you enjoy watching it. And y'all be blessed. Until next time, y'all take care and keep thriving.